The champagne flutes gleamed under the crystal chandelier as my brother Marcus stood at the center of the executive boardroom, his promotion celebration in full swing. Everyone wore their finest business attire, designer suits and cocktail dresses, that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I stood near the back in my simple navy blazer from an outlet store, holding a congratulatory gift I'd wrapped myself, watching as colleagues took turns shaking his hand and praising his meteoric rise to senior vice president. That's when he spotted me across the room, raised his glass with that familiar smirk, and announced loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, look who finally crawled out of their studio apartment to join the real world. Ladies and gentlemen, meet my brother, David, our family's official failure." The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter, and I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me, some with pity, others with curiosity about the black sheep who dared show up to a corporate celebration. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning had started with such hope. I'd received the formal invitation 3 weeks earlier, elegant cardstock with gold-embossed lettering announcing Marcus Thornfield's promotion to Senior Vice President of Operations at Meridian Industries. Despite everything between us, despite the years of subtle jabs and not-so-subtle dismissals, I decided to attend. He was still my brother, and somewhere buried beneath the competitive hostility that had defined our relationship since childhood, I wanted to believe there was still room for family pride. I'd spent an hour that morning trying to find something appropriate to wear. My closet wasn't exactly filled with corporate attire. As a freelance graphic designer who worked mostly from home, my wardrobe consisted mainly of comfortable jeans, vintage t-shirts, and the occasional button-down for client meetings. The navy blazer was a compromise, something I'd bought years ago for a wedding and rarely worn since. It felt foreign on my shoulders as I adjusted it in the mirror, like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. The venue was everything I expected from Marcus, chosen to impress rather than welcome. The Fairmont Hotel's executive conference center overlooked the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of downtown's glittering towers. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays of champagne and artisanal canapes. The guest list read like a who's who of the city's business elite, faces I recognized from newspaper headlines and LinkedIn profiles. These were Marcus's people now, his carefully cultivated network of power players and decision-makers. I arrived fashionably late, hoping to slip in quietly and find a corner where I could observe without drawing attention. But Marcus had other plans. He'd always possessed an uncanny ability to sense my presence in a room, like a predator detecting movement in tall grass. Our eyes met across the crowded space, and I saw that familiar calculation flicker across his features, the mental gears turning as he assessed how my presence might serve his agenda. Marcus had been working toward this moment his entire adult life. While I'd chosen the uncertain path of creative freelancing, he'd methodically climbed the corporate ladder with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Harvard MBA, strategic networking, calculated career moves that positioned him perfectly for advancement. He'd started at Meridian Industries 5 years ago as a junior analyst and systematically eliminated every obstacle between himself and the executive suite. His colleagues respected his ruthless efficiency, his ability to streamline operations and maximize profits. What they didn't see was the way he'd perfected the art of making others feel small to make himself appear larger. The congratulatory gift in my hands suddenly felt inadequate. I'd chosen a vintage leather portfolio, something personal and thoughtful that acknowledged his achievement without trying to compete with the expensive presents his colleagues would undoubtedly bring. Now, surrounded by the opulence of the celebration, it seemed almost insulting in its simplicity. But it was too late to reconsider. Marcus was already making his way toward me, his path through the crowd as deliberate as everything else he did. He paused to accept congratulations from various guests, each interaction perfectly calibrated to reinforce his new status. A firm handshake with the regional director, a charming laugh with the company's biggest client, a respectful nod to the board members who'd approved his promotion. He moved through the room like a politician working a campaign event, every gesture designed for maximum impact, and I could see where this was heading, could feel the setup approaching like a storm system visible on the horizon. When he finally reached me, his smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "David," he said, extending his hand in a gesture that appeared gracious to outside observers but felt more like a challenge. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up. Networking events aren't usually your scene, are they?" His tone was conversational, almost friendly, but I caught the barb hidden beneath the pleasantries. Everything was a competition with Marcus. Even family gatherings transformed into opportunities to establish dominance. "Congratulations," I replied, offering the wrapped portfolio. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished." The words were genuine, despite our complicated history. Success was success, and I could separate my personal feelings from his professional achievements. But Marcus had never mastered that distinction. For him, everything was personal, every interaction a chance to reinforce the narrative he'd constructed about our respective places in the world. He accepted the gift with theatrical appreciation, making a show of examining the wrapping before setting it aside with the others. "How thoughtful," he said, his voice carrying just enough condescension to make me question whether the compliment was real. "Still doing the artsy stuff, I assume? The graphic design hobby?" The word hobby landed like a slap, delivered with surgical precision in front of his professional peers. It was classic Marcus, the ability to diminish someone's entire career with a single word choice. The conversations around us began to shift, drawn by the magnetic pull of potential drama. Office politics were fascinating to those who understood the subtle dynamics, and my presence as the brother clearly offered entertainment value. I could feel their attention like heat from a fire, waiting to see how this family interaction would unfold in such a public setting. Marcus fed off this energy, his confidence growing with each additional witness to our exchange. "Business has been good," I replied carefully, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Steady clients, interesting projects." I didn't elaborate, didn't feel the need to justify my choices to an audience that had already formed their opinions based on appearances. But Marcus wasn't finished. He never was when he had a captive audience and an opportunity to position himself as the successful brother. That's when he raised his champagne glass, the gesture commanding attention from the entire room. The conversations gradually quieted as people turned toward him, expecting another toast, or perhaps a speech acknowledging the colleagues who'd supported his rise. Instead, he used the moment to deliver his devastating assessment of my life choices, his words designed to entertain his audience while reinforcing the hierarchy he'd worked so hard to establish. The laughter that followed his announcement felt like a physical blow. Not everyone joined in. Some people looked genuinely uncomfortable with the public humiliation, but enough found it amusing to create that awful sound of group mockery. I stood there, gift still in hand, trying to process the fact that my own brother had just introduced me to his professional network as the family failure. The words echoed in the suddenly quiet space that followed the laughter, hanging in the chi, air like smoke from an explosion. My first instinct was to leave immediately, to walk out with whatever dignity I could salvage and never look back. The exit was only 20 feet away, past the buffet table and through the main doors that led to the hotel elevator. I could be in my car in 5 minutes, back to the safety of my small apartment where nobody questioned my career choices or compared my achievements to more conventional measures of success. But something kept my feet planted on the polished marble floor. Some stubborn refusal to give Marcus exactly what he wanted. His colleagues began to disperse after the initial shock wore off, returning to their conversations and champagne with the awkward energy that follows an uncomfortable moment. But the damage was done. I'd been publicly categorized, filed away in their minds as Marcus's unsuccessful brother, the cautionary tale that made his achievements seem even more impressive by contrast. Some offered sympathetic smiles as they passed, the kind reserved for someone who'd just been publicly embarrassed but couldn't be directly helped without social risk. When the executive director called to tell me the new branding had helped them secure a major funding grant, I'd felt a satisfaction that no salary increase could have provided. That project had led to others, word-of-mouth referrals that gradually built my reputation within certain circles. I specialized in working with organizations whose values aligned with my own, companies that prioritized social impact over pure profit maximization. My client list included sustainable fashion brands, educational nonprofits, progressive political campaigns, and small businesses owned by immigrants and minorities who needed professional design work but couldn't afford big agency prices. The work was meaningful, each project contributing to causes I believed in while allowing me to develop my artistic skills. But explaining this career path to family members had always been challenging. At holiday gatherings, when relatives asked about my work, their eyes would glaze over when I described logo design or website development. They understood Marcus's role immediately, could grasp the significance of his promotions and salary increases within familiar corporate hierarchies. My achievements were harder to quantify, measured in client satisfaction and creative fulfillment, rather than traditional markers of professional success. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was having these reflections while standing in the middle of Marcus's celebration, surrounded by exactly the kind of corporate culture I'd deliberately chosen to avoid. These people operated in a world of quarterly reports and performance metrics, where success was measured in revenue growth and market share. Their conversations revolved around strategic initiatives and competitive advantages, the language of business schools and boardroom presentations. It was a foreign culture with its own customs and hierarchies, as distinct from my world as any international destination. Yet watching them interact, I recognized familiar human dynamics beneath the corporate veneer. The same insecurities and ambitions that drove my creative clients also motivated these business leaders, just expressed through different channels. The young associate desperately seeking approval from senior partners reminded me of emerging artists hungry for gallery representation. The executive boasting about recent acquisitions shared the same need for validation as painters discussing their latest exhibition. The fundamental human drives were identical, only the vocabulary and metrics had changed. Marcus appeared at my side without warning, his approach as calculated as everything else he did. He'd clearly been watching me from across the room, perhaps, puzzled by my continued presence after his public dismissal. Most people would have left by now, their dignity wounded and their evening ruined. But I'd learned long ago that dignity wasn't something others could take from you, only something you could surrender. And I had no intention of surrendering anything to my brother's need for dominance. "Still here," he observed, his tone carrying a mix of surprise and irritation. He'd probably expected me to slink away, making his victory complete and uncomplicated. My persistence was disrupting his narrative, creating questions he didn't want to answer. "I thought you might want to get back to your important projects." The pause before projects was deliberate, another small knife thrust designed to minimize my work's significance. "The evening's still young," I replied calmly, not taking my eyes off the city view. "Besides, I'm enjoying meeting your colleagues. Interesting group of people." I could feel his tension increase, the way his breathing shifted when he felt challenged or uncertain. He'd mastered the art of corporate politics, but family dynamics remained more complicated territory where his usual strategies didn't always work as expected. He moved closer, lowering his voice so our conversation wouldn't carry to nearby guests. "Look, David, I know you think you're making some kind of point by staying, but you're just embarrassing yourself further. These people don't understand your lifestyle choices, and frankly, neither do I. When are you going to grow up and get a real career?" His words carried the weight of years of accumulated frustration. The older brother who'd never understood why I'd chosen difficulty over conventional success. I finally turned to face him, directly, studying the features that mirrored my own but had been shaped by different choices and priorities. Marcus had always been handsome in a conventional way, his appearance carefully maintained to project professional competence and social status. His haircut probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month, his suit tailored to enhance, his athletic build, his teeth whitened to camera-ready perfection. He looked like the kind of person who belonged in corporate boardrooms and country club dining rooms, someone born to inherit power and wield influence. "I have a real career," I said quietly. "It's just different from yours. Not everyone measures success the same way, Marcus. Some of us find fulfillment in creativity and meaningful work, rather than just climbing hierarchies and accumulating status symbols." My response was measured, lacking the anger he'd probably expected. Years of dealing with difficult clients had taught me to remain professional even when facing personal attacks, to separate emotional reactions from productive responses. His jaw tightened, a tell I remembered from childhood arguments when his logical superiority was challenged by emotional truths he couldn't quantify or dismiss. "Fulfillment doesn't pay bills," he snapped. "Creativity doesn't build retirement accounts or buy houses or provide security for families. You're 32 years old, David. When are you going to stop playing artist and join the real world?" The frustration in his voice was genuine, reflecting years of watching me choose what he considered frivolous pursuits over sensible career advancement. But his words revealed more about his own fears than my shortcomings. I'd learned to recognize projection during my college psychology courses, the way people often criticized others for choices they secretly envied or feared making themselves. Marcus had built his entire identity around external validation, corporate advancement, and social status. The possibility that alternative paths might lead to equal or greater satisfaction threatened the foundation of his carefully constructed worldview. "I am in the real world," I replied. "I pay my bills, support myself, contribute to causes I believe in, and sleep well at night knowing my work has meaning beyond profit margins. That's real enough for me." The conversation was drawing subtle, attention from nearby guests, people pretending to focus on their own discussions while straining to overhear our family drama. Marcus noticed too, his political instincts alert to any situation that might affect his professional image. He stepped back slightly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, I hope it works out for you," he said, with the kind of dismissive politeness that ended conversations without resolution. "Enjoy the party." He turned to rejoin his admirers, but I caught something in his expression that hadn't been there before, a flicker of uncertainty that suggested my calm response had unsettled him more than angry confrontation would have. Left alone again, I found myself thinking about the last time I'd seen our father before his death 3 years earlier. He'd been in the hospital, weakened by the cancer that would claim him within weeks, when he'd asked me to sit beside his bed for a private conversation. "I'm proud of both my sons," he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus has the kind of success people understand and admire. But you, David, you've stayed true to yourself despite all the pressure to be someone else. That takes a different kind of courage." His words had surprised me at the time, coming from a man who'd spent most of my childhood encouraging me to be more like my successful brother. But facing mortality had apparently given him perspective on what really mattered, the recognition that authentic living required its own form of bravery. He'd seen how I'd weathered years of family disappointment and social pressure while maintaining my creative vision, how I'd built a career that reflected my values rather than simply pursuing the highest salary or most prestigious title. The memory strengthened my resolve as I watched Marcus work the room with renewed energy, perhaps overcompensating for our uncomfortable exchange. He moved from group to group with practiced charm, his laughter a bit too loud, his gestures a bit too animated. The promotion celebration was his moment of triumph, the culmination of years of strategic career moves and calculated networking. He deserved to enjoy it without my presence casting shadows on his achievement. Marcus seemed pleased with himself, straightening his tie and accepting congratulations from a board member who'd witnessed the entire exchange. He'd accomplished exactly what he'd intended, using my presence to highlight his own success while entertaining his audience with a display of family dominance. It was expertly executed, the kind of social maneuvering that had probably contributed to his rapid career advancement. He understood how to read a room, how to position himself advantageously in any social situation. I found myself studying the faces around me, these titans of industry who'd just witnessed a brother publicly humiliate his sibling at what should have been a celebration. Some looked genuinely disturbed by the display, their expressions suggesting they'd seen something that crossed a line of basic decency. Others seemed amused by the family drama, perhaps recognizing similar dynamics in their own lives. But most had already moved on, the moment filed away as office gossip to be shared later over drinks or lunch meetings. The gift table near the entrance displayed an impressive array of congratulatory presents. Expensive bottles of wine, elegant desk accessories, crystal paperweights engraved with inspiring quotes about leadership and success. My simple wrapped portfolio looked pathetic among these corporate offerings, a handmade gesture in a world that measured value by price tags and brand recognition. I wondered if Marcus would even bother opening it, or if it would end up donated to charity along with other unwanted gifts. The hotel's catering staff continued their efficient service, refilling champagne flutes and replacing empty appetizer trays with fresh selections. They moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, professional enough to pretend they hadn't witnessed the family drama that had just unfolded. But I caught a few sympathetic glances from the waiters, recognition passing between service. Industry workers who understood what it felt like to be publicly diminished by those with more power. As the evening progressed, I remained at the periphery of the celebration, watching Marcus hold court with his admirers and colleagues. He was in his element, discussing quarterly projections and market strategies with the fluency of someone born for corporate leadership. His laugh carried across the room at regular intervals, genuine now that he'd established his dominance and could relax into his role as the evening's honored guest. The promotion represented everything he'd worked toward, validation of his strategic choices and relentless ambition. I thought about our childhood, the way competition had poisoned what should have been natural brotherhood. Marcus had always been the golden child, the one who excelled at traditional markers of success while I gravitated toward more creative pursuits. Our parents had tried to remain neutral, but their pride in his achievements was obvious, his report cards and athletic. Trophies displayed prominently while my art projects were relegated to refrigerator magnets and bedroom walls. The pattern had continued into adulthood, family gatherings becoming showcases for his latest promotion or acquisition, while my work remained largely invisible to their understanding. But standing there in that opulent hotel conference room, surrounded by people who measured worth in salary figures and job titles, I realized something had shifted inside me. The humiliation Marcus had intended to inflict wasn't landing the way he'd expected. Instead of shame, I felt a curious detachment, like I was observing the scene from outside my own body. These people didn't know me, couldn't evaluate my actual contributions or the satisfaction I found in my work. Their laughter was based on assumptions about success that didn't align with my own values or goals. The evening was far from over, and I could sense Marcus watching me from across the room, perhaps wondering why I hadn't fled in embarrassment as he'd anticipated. He'd played his cards publicly, used his moment of triumph to establish our relative positions in the family hierarchy. But something told me the game wasn't finished, that the story he'd written about successful brother and failed sibling might have chapters he hadn't considered. I adjusted my simple blazer, took a deep breath, and decided to stay for the rest of the celebration. After all, I was curious to see how the evening would unfold. The aftermath of Marcus's public humiliation settled over me like dust after an explosion. I found myself gravitating toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, needing space to process what had just happened while maintaining some semblance of composure. The view was spectacular, thousands of lights twinkling across, the urban landscape like earthbound stars, each one representing lives and dreams and struggles invisible from this corporate height. I pressed my palm against the cool glass and tried to center myself, drawing on techniques I'd learned during the lean years when client rejections felt like personal failures. The conversations behind me had resumed their normal rhythm, the brief disruption of family drama already absorbed into the evening's social fabric. But I could feel the lingering glances, the way people's eyes would drift toward me during lulls in their discussions. I'd become a curiosity, the brother who'd been publicly diminished but hadn't stormed out in embarrassment. Some seemed to be waiting for my next move, perhaps expecting tears or angry confrontation or the kind of dramatic exit that would provide more entertainment for their evening. Instead, I found myself thinking about Mrs. Chen, my 7th grade art teacher who'd changed the trajectory of my life with a single conversation. I'd been struggling academically, my grades reflecting the chaos of our parents' divorce and the constant comparison to Marcus's academic excellence. While he thrived, under pressure I seemed to wilt, my confidence eroding with each failed test and disappointed parent-teacher conference. But Mrs. Chen saw something different when she watched me sketch during lunch periods, quietly documenting the world around me with whatever pencil stub I could find. "David," she'd said one afternoon, examining a drawing I'd made of the school's maintenance worker replacing burnt-out bulbs in the hallway fixtures. "You see things others miss. That's not a common gift." Her words had seemed almost magical to a 13-year-old who'd been told repeatedly that he wasn't living up to his potential, that he needed to apply himself more like his successful older brother. She'd helped me understand that success could take many forms, that the ability to capture truth through art was its own kind of achievement. That conversation had sustained me through high school, when guidance counselors pushed me toward practical career paths, through college when professors questioned my major choice, through the early years of freelancing when family members asked when I'd get a real job. Mrs. Chen had taught me to trust my vision, to understand that conventional metrics of success didn't always capture the full picture of a meaningful life. Standing in that corporate celebration, surrounded by people who'd just witnessed my public dismissal, I drew strength from her wisdom. The catering staff continued their ballet of service, weaving between clusters of guests with practiced efficiency. I watched a young server, probably in her early 20s, navigate the complex social dynamics with impressive skill. She seemed to anticipate needs before they were expressed, refilling glasses and clearing plates while remaining virtually invisible to the powerful people she served. Her movements reminded me of my own early career, the careful attention to detail required when your livelihood depended on client satisfaction, the way you learned to read rooms and adapt to different environments. I'd started my graphic design business with nothing but a used laptop and burning determination to prove that creative work could be financially viable. The first year had been brutal, surviving on ramen noodles and coffee while building a client, base one project at a time. There were nights when I'd questioned every decision that led me away from traditional employment, when Marcus's career path seemed infinitely more sensible and secure. But there were also moments of pure creative flow, projects that aligned perfectly with my vision and skills, clients who trusted me to translate their dreams into visual reality. One of those early breakthrough projects involved designing the logo and branding package for a small nonprofit that provided art therapy for trauma survivors. The budget was minimal, barely enough to cover my basic expenses, but the mission resonated deeply with my own understanding of creativity's healing power. I'd worked nights and weekends for months, crafting an identity that captured both the organization's compassion and strength. But I also deserved to be here, to witness my brother's success, and offer genuine congratulations despite our complicated relationship. Family was family, regardless of the harsh words and competitive dynamics that had shaped our interactions. I'd driven across town to attend his celebration, brought a thoughtful gift, and endured public humiliation with grace. My presence was a gesture of goodwill that he'd chosen to weaponize for his own aggrandizement, but that reflected his character, not mine. The evening was beginning to wind down, some guests checking their phones and making polite exit preparations. The board members had already departed, their presence at the celebration more obligatory than enthusiastic. Junior employees lingered longer, reluctant to leave an event that offered rare access to senior leadership and potential networking opportunities. I watched them navigate the complex social dynamics with varying degrees of skill, some natural politicians who would probably follow Marcus's career trajectory, others more focused on technical competence than interpersonal maneuvering. As the crowd thinned, I noticed Marcus's energy beginning to flag slightly, the performative enthusiasm giving way to genuine fatigue. Hosting corporate events required significant emotional labor, the constant attention to image management and relationship building. He'd been on for hours, carefully modulating his responses to maximize professional benefit while entertaining his guests. The success was real, but so was the exhaustion that came with maintaining such calculated personas. I decided it was time to make my exit, having accomplished what I'd come to do despite the unexpected humiliation. My simple navy blazer suddenly felt less inadequate, more like armor that had protected me through an evening that could have been devastating but had instead become oddly empowering. I'd faced my brother's worst impulses and emerged with my dignity intact, my sense of self unshaken by his need to establish dominance through public embarrassment. The gift table still displayed my wrapped portfolio among the more expensive offerings, a reminder that value couldn't always be measured in price tags or presentation quality. Inside that simple package was something I'd chosen specifically for Marcus, a leather portfolio that would age beautifully with use, developing character and depth over time. It was a metaphor for the kind of growth that couldn't be rushed or manufactured, the slow development of wisdom and authenticity that came through genuine experience rather than strategic positioning. Walking toward the exit, I felt lighter than I had in hours, unburdened by the need to prove myself to people whose opinions carried no real weight in my actual life. The hotel lobby was quieter, late evening travelers and business guests moving through the elegant space with tired purpose. Outside, the city continued its restless energy, millions of people pursuing their own definitions of success and fulfillment, most of them blissfully unaware of the corporate celebration that had just concluded on the 15th floor. But something told me this evening wasn't quite finished, that the story Marcus thought he'd written about successful brother and failed sibling might have additional chapters neither of us had anticipated. I could feel it in the way he'd looked at me during our final exchange, the uncertainty that had crept into his confident facade when I hadn't reacted as expected to his dominance display. Tomorrow would bring new developments, I was certain, though I couldn't yet imagine what form they might take. For now, I was content to head home to my small apartment, to the creative projects that gave my life meaning, to the authentic existence I'd built despite all the pressure to conform to more conventional measures of achievement. The evening had been painful, but also clarifying, reinforcing my understanding of what truly mattered and what was merely social theater designed to mask deeper insecurities. The real test would come in how I processed this experience, what lessons I drew from my brother's public dismissal and my own response to it. Success, I was learning, wasn't just about achieving your goals, but about maintaining your integrity while pursuing them, about staying true to your values even when others questioned or attacked your choices. And in that measure, despite Marcus's attempts to prove otherwise, I was succeeding quite well. The call came at 7:30 the next morning, just as I was settling into my home office with coffee and sketches for a new client project. The ringtone jarred me from the creative flow I'd been cultivating, that precious mental state where ideas transformed effortlessly into visual concepts. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another robocall or marketing pitch, but something about the persistence made me check the caller ID. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code suggested a local business call. "David Thornfield speaking," I answered, expecting to hear about extended car warranties or home security systems. "Mr. Thornfield, this is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh & Associates Corporate Law. I represent Meridian Industries, and I need to schedule an urgent meeting with you regarding some corporate governance matters." Her voice was crisp, professional, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having her calls returned immediately. I nearly choked on my coffee. Meridian Industries was Marcus's company, the corporation where he'd just been promoted to senior vice president, the same company whose executives had witnessed his public humiliation of me less than 12 hours earlier. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong person. I don't have any business with Meridian Industries." "Actually, Mr. Thornfield, you do. Quite significant business, in fact. The records show you as the primary shareholder of Thornfield Holdings, which owns 68% of Meridian Industries' outstanding stock. We've been trying to reach you for several months regarding some board governance issues that require your immediate attention." The room seemed to tilt sideways. I set my coffee cup down carefully, my hand suddenly unsteady. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "Thornfield Holdings, sir. The investment company established by your late father, Richard Thornfield, approximately 15 years ago. You're listed as the sole beneficiary and controlling shareholder following his death 3 years ago. The company holds majority ownership of Meridian Industries, among other assets. We really do need to meet as soon as possible." My father. The name hit me like a physical blow, bringing with it a flood of memories I'd carefully compartmentalized. Richard Thornfield had been a quiet man, an accountant who'd worked for small businesses throughout his career, helping entrepreneurs navigate tax codes and financial planning. He'd never seemed wealthy, never lived extravagantly, never mentioned owning significant investments. Our modest childhood home, his practical car choices, his careful budgeting during family vacations, all of it had painted a picture of comfortable middle-class existence, nothing more. "Ms. Walsh, I think there's been some kind of mistake. My father was an accountant. He worked for small businesses, helped people with their taxes. He wasn't involved in corporate acquisitions or major investments." Even as I spoke the words, doubt was creeping into my certainty. There had been aspects of my father's work I'd never fully understood. Phone calls he'd taken in his home office with the door closed, weekend trips he'd described vaguely as business meetings. "Mr. Thornfield, I understand this must be overwhelming. Your father was indeed an accountant, but he was also a very shrewd investor who preferred to keep his business activities private. Thornfield Holdings was established as a holding company for various acquisitions he made over the years, always maintaining a low profile and avoiding public attention. After his death, the estate attorneys had difficulty locating you to complete the transfer of assets. Your brother Marcus was contacted initially, but the documentation clearly identifies you as the designated heir to the investment portfolio." Marcus knew. The realization hit me with stunning clarity. My brother had known about our father's investments, had probably known for 3 years that I was the majority owner of his company, and had said nothing. Last night's public humiliation took on an entirely different dimension. He hadn't just been establishing dominance over his unsuccessful brother. He'd been performing for colleagues and superiors who were technically my employees. "Ms. Walsh, I need to see documentation of everything you're telling me. This is—" I paused, struggling to find words adequate for the situation. "This is completely unexpected." "Of course, Mr. Thornfield. Can you meet me at our offices this afternoon? Say 2 o'clock? I have all the relevant documents, including your father's investment strategies, the corporate structure of Meridian Industries, and the various board resolutions that have been pending your approval." There are also some time-sensitive decisions that require your input as the majority shareholder. After ending the call, I sat in my home office staring at sketches that suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the bombshell that had just exploded my understanding of reality. My father, the quiet accountant who'd driven a 10-year-old Honda and clipped grocery coupons, had apparently been building a business empire while maintaining the facade of middle-class respectability. And somehow, inexplicably, he'd chosen me as his heir rather than Marcus, the son who'd dedicated his life to corporate success. The next few hours passed in a surreal haze of research and revelation. I Googled Thornfield Holdings and found minimal public information, just basic corporate filings that revealed its existence without disclosing details about its holdings or activities. Meridian Industries' website showed a successful mid-sized corporation with offices in 3 states, specializing in logistics and supply chain management. Their executive team page featured Marcus prominently, his professional headshot and biographical information suggesting someone destined for continued advancement within the company hierarchy. But if what Jennifer Walsh had told me was accurate, Marcus's career had been built unknowingly on a foundation controlled by the brother he'd just publicly dismissed as the family failure. The irony was so profound it felt almost fictional, like a plot twist from a corporate thriller novel. Every promotion he'd earned, every strategic decision he'd implemented, every moment of professional triumph had occurred within a company ultimately owned by the sibling he'd spent years condescending to and dismissing. The law offices of Walsh and Associates occupied the 32nd floor of downtown's most prestigious business tower, the kind of address that immediately communicated serious money and significant influence. The reception area featured original artwork and furniture that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Jennifer Walsh herself was exactly what I'd expected from her phone manner. Impeccably dressed, radiating competence, someone accustomed to handling complex financial matters for wealthy clients who preferred discretion over ostentation. "Mr. Thornfield, thank you for coming on such short notice. I know this must be quite a shock." She led me into a conference room where documents were arranged in neat stacks across a mahogany table that could have seated 20 people. "Your father was one of our most interesting clients, actually. Very methodical, very private, but absolutely brilliant when it came to identifying undervalued companies with strong growth potential." She opened the first folder, revealing incorporation documents for Thornfield Holdings dated 15 years earlier. My father's signature was unmistakable, the same careful handwriting I remembered from birthday cards and school permission slips. He started with a small inheritance from his own father and built it systematically over decades. Never flashy acquisitions, never hostile takeovers, just patient value investing combined with strategic positioning. The next folder contained Meridian Industries' acquisition history, showing how my father had gradually accumulated shares over 8 years, initially through proxy purchases that obscured his involvement. By the time he'd gained majority control, the company's management had no idea their primary shareholder was a quiet accountant from the suburbs who drove a Honda and lived in a modest ranch house. "Why the secrecy?" I asked, still struggling to reconcile these revelations with my memories of a man who'd seemed utterly conventional in his lifestyle and ambitions. "Your father believed that wealthy people who flaunted their success became targets for everything from lawsuits to kidnapping attempts. He also thought that maintaining a modest lifestyle would teach his sons more valuable lessons than growing up with obvious privilege. He often said that character was built through struggle, not comfort." Jennifer's smile was knowing, suggesting she'd had similar conversations with other clients who'd discovered unexpected inheritances. The implications were staggering. Every financial struggle I'd endured while building my graphic design business, every moment of self-doubt when family members questioned my career choices, every time I'd felt inadequate compared to Marcus's corporate success. My father had possessed the resources to eliminate those challenges instantly, but he'd chosen to let me find my own way, to develop resilience and authenticity through genuine hardship rather than inherited advantage. "There's more," Jennifer continued, opening another folder. Thornfield Holdings doesn't just own Meridian Industries. Your father diversified extensively over the years. The documents revealed a portfolio that included commercial real estate, technology startups, renewable energy projects, and stakes in dozens of other companies. The total value was breathtaking, transforming me from a struggling freelancer into someone whose net worth rivaled Fortune 500 executives. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Your brother Marcus has been an excellent employee, Jennifer noted, consulting her notes. His performance reviews are consistently outstanding, and his strategic initiatives have significantly improved Meridian's profitability over the past 5 years. In fact, the board was considering him for promotion to president within the next 2 years, pending shareholder approval. My brother's entire career suddenly looked different through this new lens. His Harvard MBA, his strategic networking, his relentless ambition, all of it had been directed toward climbing a corporate ladder that I ultimately controlled. The company he'd dedicated his professional life to mastering was mine, owned through inheritance from a father who'd seen something in me that I'd never seen in myself. Ms. Walsh, does Marcus know any of this? About Thornfield Holdings? About my ownership stake? Her expression grew carefully neutral. The estate attorneys attempted to contact both you and your brother after your father's death. Mr. Marcus Thornfield was provided with basic information about the holdings, though not the complete details of the corporate structure or your specific role as primary beneficiary. He was asked to help locate you for the final transfer of assets, which apparently proved challenging. So Marcus had known something, enough to understand that significant money was involved, but perhaps not enough to grasp the full scope or implications. He'd known I was connected to substantial inherited wealth while watching me struggle financially, and he'd chosen to say nothing. The betrayal felt even deeper than last night's public humiliation, representing years of deliberate deception while positioning himself as the family's financial success story. What happens now? I asked, overwhelmed by the magnitude of decisions that lay ahead. Well, you have several options. You could maintain the current corporate structure and simply collect dividends as a passive investor. You could take a more active role in management, joining the board of directors, or even assuming an executive position. You could sell your holdings and invest elsewhere, or you could implement changes to the company's leadership and strategic direction. Jennifer's tone remained professionally neutral, but I caught a hint of curiosity about which path I might choose. The idea of confronting Marcus with this knowledge was both terrifying and irresistible. Part of me wanted to stride into his office immediately, to see his face when he learned that his failure brother owned the company where he'd built his career. But another part recognized the profound responsibility that came with this revelation, the lives and livelihoods that could be affected by whatever decisions I made going forward. I need time to process all of this, I said finally. Can you give me a few days to review everything and decide how to proceed? Of course. But there are a few time-sensitive matters that require your attention within the next week. The board is scheduled to vote on Marcus's promotion to president, and there's a proposed acquisition that needs shareholder approval. Nothing that can't wait a few days, but we shouldn't delay much longer. Driving home through afternoon traffic, I felt like I was inhabiting someone else's life. The city looked different through the windshield of someone who owned substantial pieces of it. The corporate towers and business districts transformed from distant symbols of success into tangible assets within my control. Every red light gave me time to process another layer of revelation, each turn bringing fresh understanding of how dramatically my world had just shifted. My modest apartment felt both smaller and larger when I returned. Smaller because I could now afford anything I wanted, larger because it represented authentic choices rather than financial limitations. The graphic design projects scattered across my desk hadn't lost their meaning, but they'd gained context as expressions of passion rather than economic necessity. I could continue this work because I loved it, not because I needed the income to survive. But the most profound realization was about my father, and the lessons he'd intended to teach through his carefully maintained deception. He'd watched both his sons develop into adulthood, one choosing conventional success and external validation, the other pursuing authenticity and creative fulfillment despite social pressure and financial uncertainty. And in his final act of parenting, he'd entrusted his life's work to the son who'd proven capable of finding meaning beyond material wealth. The phone rang again, interrupting my contemplations. This time, the caller ID showed Marcus's number, probably calling to gloat about last night's celebration, or perhaps offer some patronizing advice about my future career prospects. I let it go to voicemail, not yet ready for that conversation, until I'd decided how to handle the explosive information I'd just received. His message was brief, but telling. David, I wanted to follow up on last night. Maybe I was a bit harsh in front of my colleagues. How about lunch this weekend? We should talk. The tone was conciliatory but still condescending, the successful brother offering to patch things up with his less fortunate sibling. He had no idea that his entire professional world was about to be turned upside down. I spent the evening reading through my father's investment notes, marveling at the methodical intelligence that had built this empire while maintaining perfect camouflage. His handwritten observations revealed a man who'd understood not just financial markets, but human nature. Someone who'd recognized that true wealth came from patience, discretion, and strategic thinking rather than flashy displays of success. One note in particular caught my attention, written in his familiar, careful script. Success without character is meaningless. Watch how people treat others when they think no one important is watching. That reveals who they really are. It was dated just 6 months before his death, suggesting he'd been thinking deeply about legacy and the lessons he wanted to leave his sons. Tomorrow would bring decisions that could reshape multiple lives and careers. I could transform Marcus's world with a single phone call, could strip away the foundation of superiority he'd built his identity upon. But I could also choose a different path, one that honored my father's example of quiet strength and strategic patience. The night stretched ahead, filled with possibilities I'd never imagined, and responsibilities I wasn't sure I was ready to accept. But for the first time in years, I felt truly excited about the future, energized by the knowledge that my choices would matter in ways I was only beginning to understand. The family failure was about to become something else entirely, though exactly what remained to be determined. I spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with the magnitude of what I'd discovered, pacing my small apartment while contemplating decisions that would ripple through multiple lives. The weight of sudden responsibility felt heavier than any creative deadline I'd ever faced. By Thursday morning, I'd reached a clarity that surprised me with its simplicity. This wasn't about revenge or proving Marcus wrong. It was about honoring my father's trust and building something meaningful from the foundation he'd left me. The call to Jennifer Walsh came easier than expected. I want to schedule a board meeting for next Monday, I told her. I'm ready to assume my role as majority shareholder, and there are some changes I'd like to implement at Meridian Industries. Excellent, Mr. Thornfield. Should I inform the current board members about your identity and ownership stake? Yes, but I want to handle the conversation with my brother personally. Can you arrange for me to meet with him privately before the board meeting? I think he deserves to hear this from family first. The weekend crawled by as I prepared for conversations that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of multiple careers. I found myself thinking about leadership styles I'd observed over years of working with diverse clients, the difference between bosses who ruled through fear and those who inspired through vision. My father had apparently mastered the art of invisible leadership, guiding companies toward success while remaining completely unknown to their employees and management teams. But I didn't want to be invisible. The graphic design work had taught me the power of authentic communication, the way genuine connection could transform business relationships from transactional to transformational. If I was going to step into this corporate world, I wanted to do it in a way that reflected my values while respecting the lives and livelihoods that depended on Meridian's continued success. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the weather matching my nervous energy as I dressed in the one good suit I owned, a charcoal gray ensemble I'd bought for client presentations years earlier. It felt strange wearing corporate armor when I'd spent so many years deliberately avoiding that uniform, but the situation demanded respect for traditional business protocols, even as I planned to challenge them. Marcus's office occupied a corner of Meridian's executive floor, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city's business district. His assistant showed me in with the polite deference reserved for family members of senior executives, having no idea she was greeting her boss's boss's boss. The irony would have been amusing if the stakes weren't so high. "David," Marcus rose from behind his mahogany desk, arms extended in what appeared to be genuine warmth. He'd clearly decided to play the role of concerned older brother, perhaps feeling guilty about the public humiliation he'd inflicted at his promotion party. "Thanks for coming downtown. I know you're not comfortable in corporate environments, but I thought we should clear the air after the other night." I accepted his handshake, noting how his grip lingered slightly longer than necessary, a dominance display I'd witnessed countless times over the years. His office was everything I'd expected. Expensive furniture, awards and certificates covering one wall, photographs of him with various business leaders and politicians. The space was designed to impress visitors and reinforce his status within the corporate hierarchy, every detail carefully chosen to project success and authority. "Nice office," I said genuinely, settling into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "You've done well for yourself here, Marcus. Dad would have been proud." His expression softened slightly at the mention of our father. "I hope so. I know. He didn't always understand my career choices, but I tried to build something he could respect." The admission revealed a vulnerability I hadn't expected, suggesting that despite his success, he still craved paternal approval that would never come. "Actually, Marcus, Dad understood your work better than you might think. In fact, that's what I came to talk to you about." I reached into my briefcase and withdrew the folder Jennifer Walsh had prepared, documents that would transform this fraternal conversation into something far more complex. "There are some things about his business activities that you need to know." He leaned back in his chair, curiosity replacing the practiced warmth he'd been projecting. "Business activities?" Dad was an accountant. He did taxes for small businesses and helped people with their finances. "What business activities are you talking about?" "Thornfield Holdings," I said quietly, watching his face for any flicker of recognition. There it was, a subtle tightening around his eyes that confirmed he'd heard the name before. Dad's investment company, the one that owns 68% of Meridian Industries. The color drained from his face so quickly I worried he might actually faint. He gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles whitening as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. That's impossible. The estate lawyers mentioned some investments, but they said the beneficiary information was sealed. They couldn't tell me who inherited what." "They couldn't tell you because the inheritance wasn't yours to know about," I said gently, trying to soften the blow while maintaining clarity. "Dad left Thornfield Holdings to me, Marcus. All of it. Which means I own this company. I own the building we're sitting in. Technically, I'm your boss." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window with the jerky movements of someone whose world had just been flipped upside down. "This is insane. Dad lived in a ranch house and drove a Honda. He clipped coupons and worried about utility bills. How could he have owned all this without us knowing?" "Because he was brilliant," I replied, opening the folder to reveal some of my father's investment notes. He understood that real wealth comes from patience and strategic thinking, not flashy displays. He spent decades building this portfolio while maintaining perfect camouflage, teaching us lessons about character and authenticity that we couldn't have learned if we'd grown up with obvious privilege. Marcus returned to his chair, his corporate composure cracking as he processed the magnitude of what I'd revealed. So, when you were struggling with your graphic design business, eating ramen noodles and driving that beat-up car, you could have. You had access to all this money? No, I didn't know about it either. I only found out last week, after the lawyers finally tracked me down. I leaned forward, wanting him to understand the significance of our father's choice. Dad watched both of us develop into adults, Marcus. He saw you chase conventional success and external validation, and he saw me pursue authenticity despite financial pressure and social disapproval. And in the end, he trusted his life's work to the son who'd proven capable of finding meaning beyond material wealth. The silence stretched between us, thick with years of accumulated competition and misunderstanding. I could see him struggling to reconcile this new reality with the narrative he'd constructed about our relative positions in the family hierarchy. Everything he'd believed about his success and my failure had been built on incomplete information, and now the foundation was crumbling beneath his feet. So what happens now? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Are you going to fire me? Take over my position? Get revenge for all the times I called you a failure? The question revealed so much about how he viewed power and relationships. The assumption that authority existed primarily for dominance and retribution. It was exactly the kind of thinking my father had spent his life avoiding. The reason he'd chosen invisibility over obvious control. Marcus, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because we're family, and because Dad trusted me to handle this responsibility wisely. I pulled out additional documents Jennifer had prepared, including Marcus's performance reviews and the board's recommendation for his promotion to president. You're good at what you do. Your strategic initiatives have improved this company's profitability significantly over the past 5 years. The board wants to promote you to president, and honestly, that sounds like exactly what Meridian needs. His head snapped up, confusion replacing the resignation that had been settling over his features. What are you saying? I'm saying that ownership doesn't automatically equal management expertise. I know graphic design and creative problem solving. You know corporate strategy and operational efficiency. This company needs both skill sets to thrive in the current market. I stood and moved to his whiteboard, where quarterly projections were outlined in his precise handwriting. But there are going to be some changes in how we operate, changes that reflect different values and priorities. For the next hour, I outlined my vision for Meridian's future, drawing on everything I'd learned from working with mission-driven organizations and socially conscious businesses. Enhanced employee benefits, profit-sharing programs, partnerships with environmental sustainability initiatives, support for local community development projects. The company would remain profitable, but profit wouldn't be the only measure of success. Marcus listened with growing amazement as I described programs that would transform Meridian from just another logistics company into a model for responsible corporate citizenship. You've really thought this through, he said finally. But David, these initiatives will cost money. They'll reduce short-term profits significantly. Dad's investment notes show he was thinking long-term, building value over decades rather than chasing quarterly gains, I replied, showing him pages of careful analysis about sustainable business practices. Companies that invest in their employees and communities consistently outperform those focused solely on shareholder returns. We have the resources to prove that ethical business practices aren't just morally right, they're financially smart. The transformation in his demeanor was remarkable to witness. The competitive hostility that had defined our relationship for years began dissolving as he realized I wasn't there to diminish his role, but to expand it in directions he'd never considered possible. His questions became more engaged, his suggestions more collaborative, his entire body language shifting from defensive to curious. There's something else, I said, as our conversation wound toward its conclusion. The board meeting this afternoon will formally recognize my ownership stake, but I want you to be the one who presents the new initiatives. You understand this company's culture and capabilities better than I do. You know how to implement changes without disrupting essential operations. He stared at me for a long moment, perhaps searching for hidden agendas or manipulative motives. When he found none, his expression softened into something I hadn't seen since childhood, genuine gratitude mixed with newfound respect. "Why?" he asked simply. "After everything I've said and done, after the way I treated you at the promotion party, why are you offering me this opportunity instead of just replacing me?" The question deserved an honest answer, one that went to the heart of what I'd learned about leadership and family during my years of creative work. Because Dad saw potential in both of us that we couldn't see in ourselves. He gave me this responsibility not to punish you, but to help us both become better versions of who we already were. "You have skills and knowledge I need, Marcus. But more importantly, you're my brother, and I believe family means supporting each other's growth rather than competing for limited resources." The board meeting that afternoon was unlike anything I'd experienced in my career as a freelance designer. Sitting at the head of a conference table surrounded by executives and directors who'd been making decisions about a company I unknowingly owned, I felt the weight of responsibility that came with sudden authority. But I also felt energized by the possibilities ahead, the chance to prove that business success and social impact weren't mutually exclusive goals. Jennifer Walsh handled the legal formalities with professional efficiency, presenting documentation that established my identity as majority shareholder and primary decision-maker for Meridian Industries. The board members' reactions ranged from surprise to curiosity to barely concealed excitement about the resources and vision I was bringing to their deliberations. But the most satisfying moment came when Marcus stood to present our collaborative vision for the company's future. His natural presentation skills enhanced by genuine enthusiasm for initiatives that would transform Meridian's impact on employees and communities. Watching him articulate programs we'd developed together during our morning conversation, I saw glimpses of the brother I'd admired during childhood, before competition and insecurity had poisoned our relationship. The vote to approve our proposed changes was unanimous, the board recognizing that sustainable business practices represented not just moral imperatives, but competitive advantages in an increasingly conscious marketplace. Marcus's promotion to president was also approved, along with expanded authority to implement the community-focused initiatives that would distinguish Meridian from its competitors. After the meeting, as board members filed out discussing implementation, timelines, and resource allocation, Marcus approached me with an expression I'd never seen before, humility mixed with determination. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "Not just for the promotion party, but for years of treating you like your choices were somehow less valid than mine. I was wrong, David, about success, about what matters, about who you really are." "We were both wrong about a lot of things," I replied. "But that's what second chances are for, right? Learning from mistakes and building something better." The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Changing corporate culture required patience and persistence, the same qualities my father had demonstrated while building his investment empire. But over the following months, as Marcus implemented employee wellness programs and community partnership initiatives, as Meridian's reputation grew beyond mere profitability to encompass social responsibility, I began to understand the true genius of my father's final lesson. He hadn't just left me a business empire. He'd left me the opportunity to discover that success meant using whatever resources you possessed to make life better for others. That leadership meant empowering people rather than dominating them. That family meant supporting each other's authentic growth rather than competing for artificial hierarchies. The graphic design work continued, but now it served a different purpose. Instead of survival income, it became a creative outlet that informed my understanding of visual communication and brand development for Meridian's expanding social initiatives. The skills I'd developed during years of financial struggle proved invaluable when working with nonprofit partners and community organizations. My experience with resource constraints helping identify efficient solutions to complex challenges. Marcus and I began meeting weekly, not as boss and employee, but as collaborators building something neither of us could have created alone. His strategic mind complemented my creative problem-solving, his corporate experience balanced by my understanding of authentic, mission-driven work. The competitive dynamic that had defined our relationship since childhood evolved into something more powerful. Mutual respect between brothers who'd finally learned to value different forms of excellence. 6 months after that life-changing board meeting, Meridian Industries was featured on the cover of Corporate Social Responsibility magazine, recognized as a model for how traditional businesses could embrace sustainable practices without sacrificing profitability. The article highlighted our employee ownership programs, environmental initiatives, and community development partnerships, but it also told the story of 2 brothers who'd found a way to honor their father's legacy while building their own. Standing in my father's old home office, now converted into a planning space for Meridian's expanding social programs, I finally understood what he'd been trying to teach us. Success wasn't about individual achievement or competitive dominance. It was about using whatever talents and resources you possessed to create positive change in the world, about building bridges rather than walls, about lifting others up rather than pushing them down. The family failure had become something he'd never expected to be. A leader who measured success not in personal glory, but in the growth and flourishing of everyone around him. And in becoming that leader, he'd helped his brother discover the same truth, transforming their rivalry into a partnership that honored the best of what family could represent. My father's final gift hadn't just been financial wealth. It had been the opportunity to learn that true success came from service, that authentic power came from empowerment, and that the deepest satisfaction came from using whatever advantages you possess to create opportunities for others to thrive. The quiet accountant who'd driven a Honda and lived modestly had understood something that escaped most wealthy individuals. The greatest legacy wasn't what you accumulated, but what you enabled others to become. And in trusting that lesson to his sons, he'd given them the chance to discover that wisdom for themselves, transforming not just their relationship, but their understanding of what it truly meant to succeed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.